Since we went through the trouble of balancing the rotating assembly, I felt it was prudent to get a windage tray and put that in there. And the reason I did that was if we're going to spend the money to get the rotating assembly balanced, I'd like to optimize that by using this windage tray and kind of keeping those, say, dynamic forces from affecting our balancing. And that's the make of the windage tray there. And here's a part number for anybody who's interested. And this windage tray is just going to be like a shield that kind of covers that rotating assembly so that all the oil in the oil pan isn't going to get whipped up. It's just going to calm things down inside there so that we're not going to have a bunch of oil splash and internal forces there that are interfering with our balance, we'll say. When ordering the windage tray, it just comes with the tray itself. There's no stud kit. There's an installation kit that's separate to install this. And it comes with an instruction sheet right here. This is the part that we've got for this windage tray here. And then if we take a look down here, they're basically saying that these are the stud sets that you can get. So there's this stud set here and this stud set here. I don't know how those stud sets are represented. I haven't seen them before, but they're going to replace the bolts that bolt down our main caps. And here's the factory bolt here that came out of there. And so what I did was I just found another bolt, same size. So this is going to be a 3/4 head and 1/2 inch shank on there. And then I drilled and tapped a hole in the center of it, and I just got this stud on there. So according to those instructions, they are a stud mount system so that you can adjust the height for the windage tray when you install it. We're just fitting some of our stuff together here, and this is the factory oil pan, and we put that on there. In this case, this is a truck engine. It's a 318, and the truck engine has the rear sump. The oil pump and the pickup tube have to match the oil pan. So in this case, that rear sump, and when we pull that off there, you'll see the oil pump and the pickup to match. With that plug out, I just want to show how close the bottom of the pickup tube is to the bottom of the oil pan, and in particular where that threads in. This is our drain plug here. With the oil pan removed, here is our oil pump and here is our pickup. And there you can see how that's orientated to fit inside the rear sump. What we've got here are those bolts that we've made. So we found some the same size bolt, and then I just drilled and tapped, and that's going to be 3/8. So we're going to put 3/8 studs on there, and then we're going to set our nuts for the height for the windage tray. And now what I want to show you here is I've got these two studs on here, and I've removed those two to show you that the oil pan fits on there as it should with these studs removed. Now I'm going to put these studs back in, and then you're going to see one of our problems. Just simply putting these two studs back in here, and then of course this is going to be the top of the stud. So without the windage tray installed, we're going to need that height for the stud to install the tray. So we're just going to put that oil pan back on, and I'm going to show you where we've got some interference here. Right here you can see some scratching on the inside of the pan there. You don't see anything opposite that, but that's about one of the locations of the studs, and I think this is what our problem is, where it's interfering, contacting the pan. Now with the pan on here, you can clearly see our clearance where this is. It's in here somewhere where it's contacting, and you can see how the metal has been formed down and causing our problem on this side only. If I remove this stud, it should sit down properly, and we'll do that just to prove it. As you can see, I just removed the one stud only, and now we'll lower down the pan just to prove that is the spot where it's hanging up. And there we see that we've got contact all the way along on this side, as well as on this side, all the way along. So that one stud so far is going to be a hang up for us. And it's going to be around in this area here. So simply what we could do is we could start massaging the metal out from the inside to gain some clearance there. With the windage tray placed on here, you can see our studs visible from the top. We haven't set the height on it yet, But if we take a look, we already know that this stud as it is contacting the oil pan, so that's an issue. When we take a look at our louvers here, our louvers are pushed inwards. This is a problem as well. I think they should have been pushed outwards because that's going to interfere with our throws and for our piston rods that are coming around here. I have it marked right here where the throw is going to contact this louver here. When we went to rotate it, we could see that it was contacting there. And then in the center, it was hitting that louver there. So we've got a couple spots where this thing is touching. Now, it's my understanding that we want it as close as possible to the rotating assembly without touching. If we increase our distance from the rotating assembly, then I think we're running out of room because this tray can only go so high before contacting the oil pan. We've installed the windage tray here, and what we've done is we want to keep all of our studs consistent, and then that way we don't have to worry about them being in a specific location. Now by doing that, we're not going to have exacting measurements for clearance all the way around in the four corners of this windage tray. But again, I think it's more important to have a common size fastener rather than needing to be in a specific location and a specific size and getting that mixed up. Having said all that, we've set our clearance on the windage tray here. You can see where I've taken those baffles that were at the bottom and I've smoothed them out in order to get as much clearance as possible. If I didn't do that, we would have to raise this another 3/8 of an inch likely to maintain the clearance that we have. The connecting rods, the bolts, and the edges of the connecting rods are higher than the throws on the crankshaft. So that's our highest point, and that point would probably be about in here somewhere that we're adjusting for. With it set up the way it is, I take my straight edge here across those two flats of the nuts, and then I'm going to measure to the deck of the block there what my measurements are, and then we're going to compare that over to the oil pan and see what the difference is. So on this side I got 4 1/8, and that's going to be from my straight edge down to there. And then on this side here I got 3 7/8. The reason for that discrepancy is, again, because the focus is on making the fasteners exacting lengths. With making all 4 fasteners the exacting length, so they're all even and consistent, there's a flex in this plate here. That's why we're not getting consistent measurement on this side and this side over here. When we come over to the oil pan, you can see where I've smoothed out that transition piece there where it was down. So we kind of got as much clearance as we could, beating that out and getting it even across each side. Those are where those nuts are going to be for that windage tray. Now when we measure from our straight edge down to the bottom there, we're getting 3 5/8. Both of our measurements on the other side there at 3 7/8 and 4 1/8, there's clearly not enough room to fit that windage tray in with the factory oil pan. After measuring both our clearances on the installed windage tray and the factory oil pan, it's clear that they're not going to work together. All said and done, if you choose to go this route and want to make things easy for yourself, you're going to need to buy the windage tray, the oil pan, and the stud kit. There's a little modification that I want to do on this oil pan here. When you take a look down in the bottom, you see that nut on the inside of the pan. Well, because of that nut, you don't drain all the oil out of the bottom of the pan. And in fact, if you would have seen this when I removed it, there's just a layer of gunk in the bottom because of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that out, and then I'm going to flip it and reverse it, and then the nut will be on the outside of the pan, and then we'll have a smooth surface on the bottom so that we can drain all the oil out when we do an oil change. The factory oil plug here, no matter what the size wrench is on here, this ends up being a 1/2 inch fine thread. So what I did was I just took a 1/2 inch fine thread bolt, and then I center drilled it right there. I'm going to take that and we're going to install it into the hole here. Now with that bolt installed, the center hole is going to act as a guide for our hole saw here. So the hole saw will go in, that'll be the guide, and that's what we're going to use to cut this out. We've drilled that hole out of there, And now that we have this removed, all we're going to do is we're just going to flip it, and then we're going to weld it back in place there. And all that's doing is taking that nut and it's putting it on the outside of the pan instead of on the inside of the pan. And I don't know how much fluid would be left in there that you can't drain, but it could be as much as 4 ounces. 4 ounces of gunk and dirty oil when you're doing an oil change kind of defeats the purpose, in my opinion. I just got a magnet on the back side, kind of holding that parallel level. I make sure we got a good gap all the way around, a couple tack welds. Now I'll remove that magnet because you can't weld real close to the magnet. It kind of buggers things up while you're trying to weld. Finished welding that nut in place here. What we did have was a bolt in here to protect that face. That's the sealing surface there, protect the threads. And we've got it welded all the way around. We ground down all the high spots here for where we had that gap and welded all around in there. Down inside here, we've ground down all the high spots as well. Get rid of any loose metal that wants to break free and end up in your oil pan. We don't want that. I'm pretty satisfied with the way this part is turned out, but originally what I was thinking is if that nut was hanging down and it could end up being, catching something or want to rip off of there, what another plan I have is I just got this piece here and you could weld that on there. And all that is just a flat piece of metal that I pressed in to make it convex, and so that'll go in there. We could tack that on, weld it around this edge here, weld it around that edge there, and then we wouldn't have to worry about that nut catching anything or being ripped off of there in any way. But I did throw a bead of weld all the way around there, and I'm pretty confident that that wouldn't be the problem. But as I say, just in case, if that was something somebody wanted to do, you could do that as well, just to help protect that nut. We've set the oil pan up here. We've got some used transmission oil in the bottom there. We're just going to leave that sit and see. It's been over an hour now, and so far so good. We don't see any oil in the ice cream pail there. We can't install this windage tray because it does not match the factory oil pan. Again, if you choose to use this windage tray, you're likely going to have to upgrade your oil pan with a matching oil pan to have this tray work in conjunction with that. Factory pan and this windage tray doesn't seem to be a good combination here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my own. Here's the windage tray that I formed, and what I'm going to end up doing is tack that to the bottom of the oil pan. That's why we had to modify the drain plug first, because once we tack this in place, there'd be no getting at that. And I think if I tack it into place in the future, if you ever did drop the pan and have to clean it out, you could just simply cut the tacks and remove that plate. I grabbed a piece of paper here and I traced out that shape at the end. And then I measured back to where it's going to cover the sump. Then what I did was I measured back to this hole here, and then you see I've got that reference line in there. All I need to do is just go up to this edge here and tack weld it there. And then we're going to have some open space in the corners on either side for the oil to drain. And we're just going to tack it in the center here and then along the edges on the top on either side. So I made a template with a piece of paper to get that rough shape at the end, and then this doesn't matter because you can just measure this out as far as you want it to be. Once I cut out that rough shape out of the flat steel, then I shaped it into this half round shape here. To make the louvers, what I did was I measured out my locations, and then I used a zippy disc and I made just one slice in there in that spot where I would have measured. Once I've done that, I'm going to take a piece of square stock, and then I'm going to use these C-clamps, and I'm going to pinch it on either side. Once I got it flipped on this side here, I just simply use a blunt chisel, and then I form this shape down, forcing this metal down. This is supported by the square stock, and then that's how I get that scallop or that groove in there, those flares. The last consideration was this faces the back of the engine, so this is the front face of it. And as it sits here, we're going to be going in a clockwise rotation. I bent that metal down on this side in hopes that when the oil hits the windage tray, the centrifugal force, it'll hit the windage tray and then drain out of the hole there. So I made them all the same configuration because of that clockwise rotation. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to fit this thing in place roughly in this location, and then we're going to tack weld. We're going to put a center tack weld here. You can see we're going to get drain back in the corners, and then a couple tack welds along either side right there, and maybe one last one right in that corner there to hold that piece, and then that should suffice. And of course we're just going to do a couple of tacks first just to kind of hold it in place so that when we go to install it, we're not going to have any trouble fitting the pan on over top of our oil pump and our oil pump pickup.